Right now, Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We've got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome inside the Fan Cave. Bob Pompeani here, manning the controls. All you have to do to call us, as you know, is dial the number 412-575-2600. We do this show 7 nights a week right here on KDKA+, and on most nights, 93.7 The Fan. It's simulcast. We find Chris Mueller of The Fan up there at 93.7 The Fan. And Chris, we're going to begin with what Mike Tomlin said today, and he said a lot today. He was up there for about 35 minutes, which is a lot longer than normal, but there were a lot of things to get into. I thought one of the most important things and key things he talked about was going outside the organization to get an offensive coordinator. The last two have been internal promotions, and they did not work well, and now he's looking around. I think that's a good thing to do. How big of a pool do you think he'll be looking at this point?
Well, he seems to have at least temporarily limited it to guys who have actually called plays at the NFL level, so that would be artificially voluntarily removing all those up-and-comer types. You know, a Houston quarterback coach like Gerard Johnson,
right.
Just guys who are getting a lot of buzz as a quarterback coach or I guess presumably a passing game coordinator. I like the fact that they're going to go outside the organization. I do. I like the fact that they didn't just try to say, well, Eddie Faulkner had a nice run as the schemer during the week, and Mike Sullivan called plays well on game day these last couple of weeks. I'm glad they're going outside the org, but I really don't understand why, Bob, that they are limiting themselves to guys who have already done this at the NFL level. We have seen plenty of first-time coordinators succeed with play calling.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty startling thing to hear right off the bat, because I thought he would, you have a lot of candidates out there, and I'm glad when he said outside the organization, and then the question was the follow-up, do you want someone who's done this before at this level? And he said yes. So there are a lot of names to get into, and I'm sure we will over the next couple of weeks. But I also was a little bit surprised, I don't know about you, when he said that Kenny Pickett will resume QB1. He'll be on top. He was never taken off the depth chart, so I guess that's really not a story. But it is to people who follow Mason Rudolph, and I wonder how he took that. And even though he said there's a competition, if you're Mason Rudolph, do you really buy into that? Are you guaranteed you're going to get that fairly? Because quite frankly, the last 4 games were pretty good. And based on that, you would have thought maybe would it have shocked you that if he came in and said, you know what, we're going to start with Mason as QB1, but it really doesn't matter because it's all about competition.
Well, strategically speaking, if it's just, saying Kenny's the QB1 is just a commentary on he and Mason Rudolph, well, he can't say Mason Rudolph's QB1 because they've got to go through a contract negotiation with him if they want to keep him here in Pittsburgh because he's a free agent. So from a strategic perspective, it would not behoove Mike Tomlin to say anything about Mason other than I'm happy with his efforts. He obviously showed us something, because if you say, oh, no, Mason, we expect him to come back, Mason and his agent can go to you and say, well, here's our price, thanks, have a good one. If you don't want to meet our price, then your fans that wanted my guy here to be the QB1 are going to be pretty put out that he's not. But I think that this organization truly believes in Kenny Pickett still. I don't share that level of belief, but humor me with this, Bob. There's a sentiment around town, and I don't think it's unfounded, that they were a little gun-shy about passing on Pickett because of what happened so many years back with Dan Marino. Now I would imagine that there is at least some consternation that if they give up on Kenny after 2 years and his time in Pittsburgh is one contract and done, and he goes somewhere else and excels, they would feel like they made that mistake again, but even worse. So I do think that plays into it. I think they want to give him 1 year. I do think one thing's obvious. He might be QB1, but if he doesn't show out next year, his time in Pittsburgh as the starter is going to be at an end.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin stressed it is a huge year for him, and absolutely true. We'll talk more about the quarterback room coming up, but this tweet, which is our GMC Sierra tweet of the night, comes from Jerry Dulac of the Post-Gazette, who pretty much said what we all knew, and that was that Art Rooney will, in fact, extend Mike's contract here sometime soon. So we'll talk about that. We want your input as well. 412-575-2600 is the number to call. Hit us up on Twitter at KDPomp, at Chris Mueller PGH. We're just getting started, and we want to hear from you. It's the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call right here on KDKA Plus and 93.7 The Fan. All right, welcome back. We continue right here. Bob Pompeani, Chris Mueller with you at 412-575-2600. Chris, before we go to the lines, what if Mason Rudolph decides to leave? Personally, I think this is still probably his best landing spot, and I'm sure the money's going to be increased. They won't have Mitch Trubisky. They're still going to need someone even if he does come back. But if he doesn't, what do you think they do next?
If he doesn't, then I think it's automatic that they sign somebody, some mid-level player in free agency at that position.
Trade?
And then I think this, maybe trade somebody though, like for Justin Fields.
Yeah.
Then you make sure that Kenny Pickett is your QB2 because you're not trading for a guy like that.
Competition, baby, right? It brings out the best of them. That's what they say.
There would be no competition. Kenny Pickett would lose that competition quickly. It seems to me that what Mike Tomlin said, the upshot today here is that they are not in on the Justin Fields sweepstakes. Now, he is obviously a savvy operator. If Omar Khan quietly wants to be in on that, and so does Mike, he's not going to tip his hand, but if Mason Rudolph doesn't come back, I really believe they try to sign some sort of mid-level guy who maybe fits whatever the system is that the offensive coordinator they bring in would want to run. And then they draft a guy in like the fourth or fifth round that they maybe think has some warts, but also has some raw talent that a new coordinator could tap into.
Yeah, I think all those are on the table. It's going to be fascinating to see in this offseason. A lot of stuff needs to get done, and it'll start rather quickly because a lot of teams already are talking to some of these coordinators, and you better catch up quickly if you plan to get one of them who has, quarterback, offensive coordinator experience. Meantime, let's go to the lines. We have a lot of them. Chris, Mike in Stowe Township is first up. Welcome to the Sports Call. Mike, how are you?
Hey, good evening, gentlemen. I think Tomlin pretty much guaranteed that Mason's going to go someplace else because they ignored him for 3 years. And does this sound familiar? He sat behind a future Hall of Famer and learned. Does that sound like Jordan Love or,
No, Mike, it doesn't, because the entire NFL had a chance to sign Mason Rudolph last offseason, and 31 other teams said thanks but no thanks, which wouldn't have happened if Jordan Love had been available to a team in free agency. I promise you that.
But I would say that there weren't really 31 teams. Only so many teams needed a backup quarterback or somebody else. However, your point is well taken. And listen, all I'm saying is, he talked very nicely today about Mason Rudolph. And that makes me think that he did have a different opinion about him than he did before putting him in. And it took him all the way until he had no other choice to put him in because Trubisky had failed and Pickett was injured. My only thing about Pickett and, what we saw at the end of the season, he had that one game in Cincinnati, and that's the only game he had that was without Matt Canada, and he had arguably his best game. I still would be curious to find out how he would have handled the last 4 after that. Never got that chance, so therefore, we'll see. I think a lot of us have said we'd like to see him in a new system. He may get that opportunity. And the thing is, Chris, if he doesn't take advantage of it, now they're really in a little bit of a conundrum, aren't they?
They are, if he doesn't take advantage of it. 2 things. First, can they do something? I don't care what system he plays in. Can they very gently put like one of those electric, fence dog things on him? Just a very tiny vibration when he leaves the pocket prematurely in practice. Kenny, there's no pressure. It's not going to get to you. Hang in there for 1.3 more seconds, and there's probably going to be an open receiver for you to hit. I would like him to do that. No system will work unless he breaks himself of that habit. And 2, listen, I'm not trying to pile on the guy. After the Cincy game, he was healthy against Arizona. He hit one big throw early, and then his numbers again tailed off, and we saw bad habits creep in. And he's probably not getting hurt if he's finding an open receiver on 3rd down before that sneak play, or 2nd down before that sneak play where he did get injured. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm not going to put as much stock as some others are in one good game against Cincinnati, only because, Bob, we also saw Mason Rudolph play even better and put up 34 points in the process.
Yeah, there's no question about that. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see exactly where this goes, and I agree with the pocket presence thing. And listen, Mike Tomlin talks, and I appreciate as well, quarterback mobility. But the mobility has to take a back seat to the ability to be in the pocket. You have to be able to make those reads, stay in there, know you're going to get pressure, know you're going to get hit sometimes. But we saw Mason Rudolph do that. He took a hit several times late, but he made sure he got his throw off. The one in Seattle to George Pickens was a good example of that. All right, back to the lines we go. Paul in Salzburg is next up right here on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. Hey, Paul.
Bob, the one thing I wanted to say is I'm 76 years old, and I've been watching the Steelers from before the 70s into the 70s. Kenny Pickett is a bust. He's the same thing as the linebacker Devin Bush. They need to cut him right now. Go get themselves a quarterback that can play the game. And, the few years I got left in my life, let me watch a team that's worth watching.
Well, I hope for your sake that happens, and I hope you live a long time. 76 is a good life, but we want to see you get to 96 or beyond that. In the meantime, Kenny Pickett is only 2 years into a 4-year thing now. His money's guaranteed. They're not going to do anything but give him every opportunity, and they should. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes, as we see with Mason Rudolph and some of these other guys who come around, and, Jake Browning's a good example of someone who sat around in Cincinnati for a while, and although he's not an every game starter, but he does show that he has the ability to handle situations in a couple of games span. So, Chris, I want to see what happens, and I'm not going to cut him or do anything. I'm going to give him opportunities, and then we make judgments from there, I suppose.
Well, I think he's played enough games where you could form judgments about him permanently, and I certainly have. Maybe I try to be a little nicer about it than our last caller, Paul, there. But you know what else he's going to have to do that was pretty obvious is win over his teammates again. Because that's sort of the looming undercurrent here, if you want to call it that, if that's not an oxymoron, Bob. His teammates on offense clearly rallied behind Mason Rudolph. I mean, Deontay put it right out there. Everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. It was very clear that George Pickens got along well with Rudolph. You saw them talking all the time. Pickens seemed pretty happy, seemed receptive. Running backs, offensive linemen, guys talking about camaraderie that they felt they developed late in the season. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think they're all talking about the same thing. That's going to be an uphill battle for Kenny Pickett.
No question about it. We have an interesting tweet here, and you can hit us up, as I said, on Twitter, at KDPomp, at Chris Mueller, PGH. Zach Williams, Chris, says, why wouldn't the Steelers let the last year of Tomlin's contract play out before they extend him or not, just like the Cowboys are doing with McCarthy? And the Cowboys did that before. I think I'm right in saying that Jason Garrett got the same treatment. Went to the final year, no extension, see what you do, kind of approve it the situation. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in one case there with McCarthy, you're talking about a different thing. We know offense matters more in today's NFL. It's just the way it is. He's their primary play caller. The reason that wouldn't work for Mike Tomlin is the single biggest thing this team has to do this offseason is hire an offensive coordinator. Well, who wants to come and work for a lame duck, even if it's a guy who has the reputation around the league Tomlin has, even if it's for a franchise like the Steelers that doesn't make rash decisions, even when they sometimes maybe should? No one's going to want to work for a guy where they might be back out on the street looking for a new job in 1 year. So that's why they wouldn't let him go in as a lame duck, because it would completely neutralize all of the other work that they would try to do. It would undercut it. They wouldn't be able to get free agents that they might be looking at for whom Tomlin would be an attractive coach to play for, because what do you know? 1 year in, if it goes really south, he would be gone.
Dave joins us right now in Franklin Park. Hey, Dave, welcome to the program. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Thanks for taking my call. Mm-hmm. I have a hypothetical question about the Steelers coaching staff. If all of the assistant coaches were fired tomorrow, who among them would be on the short list to get a call for a job interview from another NFL team? I'll hang up.
Yeah, we've talked about this for a long time. Look at Randy Fichtner. How long has he been sitting around? I don't know if he intends to coach again, but if he does, how long has it been, Chris? He hasn't been given an opportunity. I don't know if Matt Canada will get another one at this level. He may in college. I think that's an interesting point.
Eddie Faulkner would probably get a job as a position coach somewhere, maybe an offensive, run game coordinator if people thought the Steelers ran the ball pretty well. But the caller's point there is well taken. I do not think that this is a highly valued coaching staff. I don't think Terrell Austin, despite his long time in the NFL, is seen as a particularly good defensive mind right now. So I'll do the rare thing here, Bob. I'll simply say caller wins the point. I have no quality rebuttal to it to kind of undercut what he said.
No, I think maybe what he was saying is how many would get, offensive coordinator jobs, head coaching
None.
jobs,
Zero.
defensive. Yeah, that's my point. A lot of those guys are pretty good position coaches and do what they do. For example, I think Mike Tomlin still is the man calling defensive plays, or at least not calling them, but he has a large part of what goes on there, which makes the performance in the playoffs the last 5 times in there defensively not that impressive for sure when they've been outscored early in the games and pretty much out of the games, as we saw here against Buffalo when they fell behind 21-7. We got to take a break here, Chris. More calls on the way. It's 412-575-2600. This is the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call on KDKA Plus and 93.7 The Fan. Chris, before we go, let's break down these games real quick over the weekend, since this is the last time that you and I will chat. Do you see any upsets on these 4 games that remain?
Don't see one in San Francisco, Green Bay. I think the Niners are too good. I think it would be Houston will cover, but I'm hard-pressed to see that they're going to win that game, I think Tampa Bay could beat Detroit. I don't think they will. I do see by point spread one definitive upset, even though it doesn't feel like one to me. I think the Chiefs are going into Buffalo and doing it to that poor, deprived fan base yet again as 2.5-point dogs. The winter of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce will continue, Bob.
That's right. She's going to be there in Buffalo, where they got another 1.5 feet of snow, and they had to cancel a hockey game yesterday. So I don't know what is on the ground, but it must be a wall of snow. Regardless of that, I think Buffalo's going to get by them. I'll disagree with that, although I can see that being one of the games that goes the other way. I think if I'm going to pick one upset, it would be Houston over Baltimore. Baltimore hasn't played in a while. Lamar hasn't played in 3 weeks. We've seen this story before, and I'll tell you something. Stroud looks good. That defense looks better than what I think a lot of people thought it was. So that's the one that I would look at, especially with the point spread. I love points. The points are huge in that game. I think that's way too many points.
I think it's too many points for Jackson, and the calls about him not winning playoff games will get louder if they do blow it. The game I'm most looking forward to, though, by far, real quick, is Lions-Bucks. I think that's going to be a ton of fun. Ford Field is going to be an absolute nut house, and either Jared Goff or Baker Mayfield's going to play for a chance to get to a Super Bowl. Who'd have thunk it?
Tickets are like $1,200 a piece, too, so you got to bring some cash, even though they will take just digital currency. Good night, everyone. Thanks, Chris. We'll see you again tomorrow night, 10:35. Good night.